Thank you. Thank you for having me very much. It's really nice to be here. I will try to have some nice pictures, Justin, just for you. But I'm going to start actually with a picture of Manchester, where Justin and I worked almost 20 years ago, which, as he points out, is also a textile city, and the picture proves it's not as attractive as Prato, basically. This is where we used to have a small drop-in center for creative businesses to learn about the internet. This was 1995 or thereabouts, when we weren't really sure whether the internet was going to catch on or not. Would it continue actually to be something of value, or would it be something of value at all? And we worked with local businesses to build websites for them to understand what that was. It was very much hands-on, making-led research, which is what I'll talk about a lot, and a big influence on my work. So now I'm here, which is a very different kind of place, as you can see. So I'm in near Treviso, in Veneto. Non parlo italiano, mi scusi, yet, ancora. But as you can see, it's kind of a bit more institutional in a way, but I'll talk about the ways that it also isn't institutional. And Cecilia pointed out earlier, I showed her some of the handbook that we just made for our Fabricanti, our researchers. The researchers made it themselves, and it's deeply non-institutional, I hope. I'm going to talk briefly about Fabrica because it connects to the main part of the talk, as hopefully you'll see. So we have researchers at Fabrica for 1 year. They come from all over the world. We sponsor them to come. We give them a bursary and a return ticket, and so they come from Chile, China, Russia, India, but of course lots from the EC as well. And it's a very transdisciplinary kind of environment, so there's multiple disciplines and multiple nationalities. These are all shots from the handbook, which was just released, and this gives you a sense of what the place looks like, I suppose. We're in a 17th century villa, and then a late 20th century extension. So this extension is by the Japanese architect Tadao Ando. The villa is by architect unknown. Yes? I see. Okay. No problem. It's not very nice music anyway. So we, as you can kind of see, the kind of people we have here and the kind of work that we do. We have weekly lectures, we have visiting experts. There's no formal tuition. It's all very research-led on projects in practice. And it's for researchers that are 25 years old or younger. We see ourselves somewhere between a workshop and a school and a studio. I think that's an interesting mix, and also points to something I want to talk about, increasingly hybrid situations. So something which isn't just a school, if you like, and isn't just a studio, but something which hovers in between all of these things and is able to move in and out of those spaces. There's all kinds of questions. That's a whole other talk about how it qualifies as education or qualifies as studio. But we talk about making things. We don't write reports. Having been a consultant, I know that most consultants' reports don't get read by the client who are paying for them, never mind anybody else. Something like 80% of ARUP reports don't get read. And they're good reports as well. So then we know there's a problem with that kind of practice. So we're trying to make objects or products or services or scenarios or events or applications that describe the research, that in effect are the research. And then we spend a lot of time making sure that they're well communicated. They don't just sit on the shelf. We're interested in social and cultural change, but particularly how that's affected in the age of the network. If we can describe this as the age of the network, which I think we can as one of the major transformative conditions, how is it changing the way that we live, work, play, organize, decide? And we're trying to address the 21st century on its own terms, if you like. So this is, I suppose, a thought in terms of the second part of the talk. My sense is that we're in a different age. I suppose every age probably said that. But there's certainly a different condition about the 21st century to, say, the 19th century, and I think many of the institutions that we choose to organize the world by are still largely in a 19th century mode. So we're trying to understand what an organization would be if it was designed for the 21st century from the ground up. We're not there yet, but we're interested in it. And another interesting condition of Fabrica is created by Benetton, the clothing company, in 1994, so we're almost 20 years old. And they still are the primary funder of Fabrica, although we work for other commercial clients as well. So that gives us an interesting foundation from which to work. So we don't have to work necessarily in consultancy model or educational model, but again, something in between. This is old stuff from Fabrica. Some of you may know this, the first issue of Colors. Shot by Oliviero Toscani and designed by Tilburg Kalman. These are kind of classic ads from the 90s from Benetton. These were done at or near Fabrica, put it that way. This is recent Fabrica work from maybe 2 years ago, which some of you might recognize as well. The one with the Pope in it got us into rather more trouble in Italy than this one did, but anyway. And as I said, we're from all over the world. In the handbook, because we're from all over the world, we have to put in instructions to how to live in Italy. Don't have a cappuccino, after 11 a.m. or thereabouts. Don't cut spaghetti with a knife. Some with our Japanese students sometimes have to point out, don't put pasta on a pizza. So that's all in the book as well. You can download. And we're near Treviso. We all live in Treviso, but the campus is north of Treviso. And it sort of looks like this. So, the interesting thing, perhaps, in terms of where we're going, is this idea of intensely multidisciplinary work, which is linking to the point about city making. I think where we are now, it's no longer enough to have the Department of Planning to look after planning in the city. It's a much bigger problem than planning. It's no longer enough, as I'll point out later, to have architects in charge of even the built fabric, never mind the idea of what the city is. You need the mix of architects, planners, lawyers, sociologists, communications experts, citizens, politicians. Everything has to come together, because the city is ultimately a holistic condition or experience. So we're interested in this kind of intensely multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary even teams. I've talked about that. So just for an example, some new studios we just started. One is around actually the end of life. Another word for that is death, I guess. But it's actually about the living bits before you die. There's not much we can do once you die, to be honest. But we can improve the conditions in which people die. This is interesting, 14th century prints from an Italian book. I can't say the name in Italian, so forgive me. But it's basically a guide to how to die, produced when there was an intense plague running through Italy. So they had to write a book to explain to people what to do, how to make the end of life as not bad, as good as it could be, given the conditions. And so we started a studio looking at this. And we're working with the National Health Service in the UK. We're also working with Italian partners around various health-related issues. This isn't our work. This is a still from a video game that a man has produced to understand how he can relate to his terminally ill child. So the child and the father play the game together to understand what's going on. It's incredibly difficult to talk about this stuff, which is why it's an interesting topic for a studio. We don't have the vocabulary. We don't have a culture. We don't have a condition that we can approach this with. And you can't just approach it as a nurse or a sociologist. It has to be this holistic condition. These are objects made for people with Alzheimer's to help them remember particular aspects. You remember through sense, so these are multi-sensory objects. This is a very Portland thing to do, or Seattle, Portland thing to do. It's a dinner about death, where you can actually organize a social event and help people talk through what's going on when someone's dying that's close to them. So this is the kind of work that I think necessitates this multidisciplinary approach. I think the city is the same in an interesting way. We have another studio about politics in the age of the network, where we're looking at, this is Cairo, Tahrir Square, we're looking at these kind of patterns of activity. This is a guy being treated whilst using his BlackBerry to see what's going on in the protest. I mean, this one image says an awful lot. He's simultaneously having a form of surgery in a riot and still connected to the riot in some way, or the protest, or the manifestation. We're also interested in new ways of documenting this. So this is footage from Warsaw of a drone camera, a camera attached to a very simple drone. And this provides a sort of visual journalism that we've never seen before. This image wasn't possible before the last few years, in a sense. We don't have helicopters that can do that, and if you had a helicopter that could do that, a citizen couldn't own it. Now a citizen can make a drone for $50, more or less, and create this kind of journalism themselves. That's a massively interesting difference from a visual culture point of view, journalistic point of view, but also of use within politics. It's a political mechanism, essentially. This is a similar thing. Glenn Greenwald is releasing the Snowden files around the PRISM and the National Security Administration in the US from his house in the Brazilian jungle, where he lives with his partner and 3 dogs and a high-speed broadband connection. And he is creating the news agenda by releasing the Snowden files with Laura Poitras, the documentary filmmaker. This is very different to Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman in All the President's Men kind of journalism. And finally, this is kind of a micronation. We're interested in micronations. What scale of decision-making is appropriate? Is a city a good scale for a decision? Probably is, actually. Is a neighborhood a good scale for a decision? Is a nation-state a good scale for a decision? Not always. Might be when it comes to military. Possibly not when it comes to urban planning. This was a micronation invented by an Italian engineer off the Adriatic coast, 1 meter outside the Italian national border in 1968, I believe, called the Island of Roses. And he built it himself, declared it a micronation, said it had its own currency, and the Italian Navy blew it up within 24 hours. So it now exists on the bottom of the Adriatic. But these are also interesting possibilities. And finally, this movement around open structures, what's being called adhocracy, emergent processes around building the city, bottom-up movements, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, this kind of thing. So that's all going on in these studios. Those are some of the other ones, and we've sort of deleted the bottom line of disciplines at the bottom. We now organize in these studios. And we're trying to think, how do we design for the 21st century history? So enough of Fabrica stuff. But the link I'll take into the city-making part is, how do you design a structure to address something like a city, to address the idea of Prato as a creative city? How do you approach that from a design point of view? And I don't mean the design of objects, like what we do with the hospital, or what we do with a piece of textiles, but how do you design the way that the thing happens? How do you design the conditions that creates a city? So in a sense, the idea of city making, people talk about city making as a discipline or a practice or an industry. When I was involved in city making directly, we were working on projects like this, or like this, very innovative urban projects. This one in Abu Dhabi, often they didn't happen. Maybe half the time they don't happen, half the time they do. The time that they do happen, they're massively compromised, or they don't look anything like the render, of course. As Justin mentioned, there are lots of big ideas around cities at the moment, kind of coming from the top down, if you like. The creative city is one of them, another is the smart city. This was at the Shanghai Expo in 2010 in the urban best practices area. You can see on the sign in the background. And I'm not sure anybody in the room thinks that's an urban best practice area by the look of it, but that's the way it was in Shanghai. And then when you went there, you often saw these visions of the future. This is from the Cisco stand, where they had this idea of the city as this kind of 3D holographic model with the city council sort of officers, like these Greek gods kind of standing over it, being able to move things around in real time. I think it's completely absurd for what it's worth as a technologist and someone that's worked in cities for a long time. I think also, luckily, it's not going to happen. No one's buying it, but still, it's maybe the dominant rhetoric in city making at the moment. Next door to the Cisco one was the General Motors Pavilion, which had this vision of the future, which had exactly the same narrative plot, bizarrely enough, but featured a lot of cars, because it was General Motors. So this is their vision of the city, and these cars kind of become your apartment and so on. And again, it won't happen. This was supposed to be in Shanghai in something like 2030 as well, and even Shanghai will largely be like 2013 era Shanghai in 2030. Cities don't change that quickly. More importantly, they're flawed fundamentally because we don't make cities in order to make buildings or infrastructure. And those are very infrastructure-led visions. Cisco, network routers, General Motors, cars. We make cities to come together as people, actually. And buildings are the things we need sometimes to do that, but that's a secondary factor. It's not the primary point of cities. It's not why we started urbanizing 25,000 years ago. We can argue about why we come together in cities. That's probably a whole other talk that I'm not qualified to give. But for instance, it might be to make culture. Look around. I mean, this city is full of culture. That's actually what drove people into the cities in the first place, I'd argue, to some degree. Equally, commerce. This city is full of commerce and built on commerce. That's also why people move to cities. You might talk about community, to create other people, or a sense of conviviality, or some even higher order purpose of the city itself as a kind of a new form of human organization. That's a little bit mystical, but there's something about living together in collaboration with other citizens, which is a different condition for the human race. And that's an incredibly interesting, lofty proposition to start the conversation about city making around. Much more interesting than buildings or infrastructure. From there we can get to buildings and infrastructure, but we have to look at this question. And interestingly, unlike the smart city visions, all of the stuff I had on the previous slide is often very inefficient. Culture isn't efficient. Playing a game of football with your friends isn't efficient. But that's what people do, given half a chance. So whereas the infrastructure and building-led discussion is often increasingly led by efficiency. It does affect the city when we think about infrastructure. When we've done this kind of smart city move in the past, I'd say it was in the 1950s and 1960s when we also had a very infrastructure-led vision of our cities. This is actually a wonderful book written by a very smart person who is an associate of Archigram, the British engineers, sort of like the English version of Superstudio. And it's a lovely book in many ways, but he assumed that the city was going to be built around the car, which it was, sadly, and that also we would have all kinds of other technology-led improvements, like moving pavements everywhere. He didn't think a single pavement in the city would actually be static. Why would you have it static when it can move? And this again kind of shows the problem. No, we don't see moving pavements anywhere except airports, which are a strange kind of non-city. But when you do see the infrastructure playing out in the city, when you see General Motors allegedly lobbying the tram companies in Los Angeles to remove the trams and the streetcars from the streets in order to increase network on their traffic, as a Cisco employee might say, that had a fundamentally negative effect on Los Angeles, which they're still unpicking 50 years later and probably continue to unpick for the next 100 years. Many, many cities all over the world, including Italian cities, drove up the wrong cul-de-sac there when they started building around the car, and it's going to take us another 5 decades to unpick that. Richard Weller, the Australian architect, describes those bits of cities, the suburban areas, as the city that cars built when we weren't looking. My colleagues at Monash know what I'm talking about. The Australian city that Richard's from Perth, but that's a condition there. It's a condition in American cities, but it's equally a condition in Italian cities. We don't see it in the same way, but it's absolutely the case. It's very difficult to live in an Italian city without a car, unfortunately. If we go back a bit, and I don't want to get overly nostalgic, in Australia you can only really go back about 150 years or so with footage. But if you look at this film of Sydney from 1906, you see a condition which is actually very familiar to an Italian. You see a very fluid edge of the pavement there. You see bikes moving all over the place. You see horses moving around. There are trams running up and down the street. People can jump on and off the tram whenever they like. The Italians in the audience are now going, yeah, so what? That's what you do in the middle of cities. But unfortunately, in a lot of Western cities, this was ripped up and replaced with cars because of that efficiency, top-down, infrastructure-led thinking. And I'd argue there's a real beauty in inefficiency. I live near Venice, and this is a shot of Venice. And Venice is clearly one of the most ludicrous, inefficient cities you can imagine at this point. I mean, maybe 900 years ago, it was relatively well tuned to its conditions, but now it's insane. But millions of people go there every single year to experience Venice as a deeply attractive place, as in attracting people to it. And yet it's highly inefficient. So there's some tension here between those ideas. Nonetheless, I think there's a much bigger question here. Given that we, Shane or someone or other architects in the room, I think, could actually sketch an idea of the 21st century resilient city effortlessly, and it would be good. We kind of know all of the technologies we need. We kind of know how it probably should work. We have a sense of even the governance systems possibly that might work for it. It's incredibly difficult to do. It's really difficult to do. You try and build a sustainable building in an Italian city. It's incredibly difficult, never mind any other country. So why is that? And I go back to a British architect from the 60s, Cedric Price, who's a kind of a hero of mine, largely because he didn't really build much, but had some interesting thoughts. And he said, technology is the answer, but what is the question? And this was in the 1960s, again, when we were jumping on those technology-led solutions. And he said, hang on a minute, we need to step back and think, well, what's the question in the first place? Again, what is the city for in this case? Who is it for? Those would be kind of questions to ask before you go into a project. And we rarely do that. So here's a question in that sense. Can yesterday's institutions, which by the way are today's institutions, produce the necessary outcomes for tomorrow? So if we want to make a climate-resilient city, for instance, climate change resilient or adapted to climate change, how can you use the same structure that created climate change to solve that? Given that climate change was created by the institutions of, let's say, the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, can you look to the same people to fix it? Seems an odd question, and we see that time and time again across climate change, healthcare, education, social policy, aging population, demographic time bombs, fiscal crises, any one of the so-called wicked problems the 21st century faces. We're still facing them with old tools and old thinking. And we understand why, as Justin pointed out, things take a long time to change. There's a path dependency with the structures. There's kind of a sunk capital, if you like, in the institutions we've created. So it's not an easy fix, but we really have to ask this question quite fundamentally, it seems to me. Because at the moment, we can see the tension. This is the UK riots from 2 years ago, 2011, which was kind of an extraordinary year when the tension became very clear. These were the worst riots I can think of in my time as a British person. And very different as well to previous kind of protests. The miners' riots, for instance, which are the ones that I remember vaguely before that, growing up in Sheffield, were very clear ideologically in a way. You were pro-miners or against miners. You were for the government or for the miners. Black against white, white against black. This was less clear what was going on. It was something more like just a general breakdown, complete breakdown between the street and the government. This is Occupy. Occupy everywhere, which is still being occupied in various bits of the world. Clearly some tension between the way that we decided to organize the world and then the way that a bunch of people decided that that isn't the way we want to organize the world. We want to organize the world in a different way, somehow. The Arab Spring, same thing, essentially. And you see also similar tactics emerging, which I'll talk about. These were the riots in Stockholm, which you've probably forgotten because there's been so many since, but this was about 6 months ago. And since then we've had Istanbul, which was much bigger, Gezi Park and so on. But everywhere, in the riots in Brazil around the increase in bus fares, the riots in Paris around gay marriage, I mean, it is now a permanent condition almost. This was in Athens around the Eurozone crisis originally, and bits of Athens probably still look like this and will continue to do so. So what's interesting to us as communications and design people is actually that maybe we can look at decision-making itself as a kind of design challenge. Given that this tension is to do with decision-making, the way that we make decisions, particularly public decisions, the short word for that is politics. Not party politics, but the way we make decisions. Could we see that as a design challenge? That's an incredibly arrogant and hubristic thing to say, and I'm a designer, so of course that comes with the territory. And a designer, of course, sees things as design challenges, like a hammer only sees nails. And yet, for us, it might be an interesting possibility. Maybe there's some things within design that are useful in that conversation. Given that no other approaches are working, it might be worth a shot. My colleague in Helsinki, I worked in Helsinki the last 2 years before moving to Italy, said this, we have 18th century institutions facing 21st century problems. He put it far more succinctly than me, of course. Marco's an architect. And interestingly, the other day, a friend of mine sent me this image. He was making a slide deck. Joseph Grima, who runs our network politics studio. Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State during the Clinton administration, said the thing at the top. We are taking 21st century challenges, evaluating them with 20th century ideas and responding with 19th century tools. It's just a great quote. The other quote here is from the last issue of Domus, which is from Cody Wilson, who's the guy that made the 3D printed gun, which some of you may have seen in the news recently. He made a 3D printed gun using a 3D printer to show that it could happen. He's actually, I think he might be a law student actually. He was interested in not making the gun, but asking the question, how do you respond to a 3D printed gun? Just from a governance point of view, it's not about licenses at that point, because you're not going to a shop to buy it. You can make it yourself. So how on earth do you license something in a distributed manufacturing model like this? It's a huge question for all industries, including textiles, but certainly interesting also from a government point of view. In Italy, in the last election, we saw the rise of Movimento Cinque Stelle, which is a kind of fascinating situation in many ways. Whether you're for it or against it, I'm not particularly interested in, but as a condition, it was fascinating to see someone win so many votes, to see a party win so many votes without talking to the mainstream media and without spending any euros on advertising in a mature Western democracy of tens of millions of people. It was an extraordinary result we could not have thought about 2 years ago. It just, what? How is that possible? And of course it's possible, as we know, because again, social media led the communication side, and then piazza after piazza after piazza every single night, culminating in Rome. So to me what's interesting here is this combination. I'm interested in communications again. The tools of the piazza and social media together. The piazza is an ancient urban technology, if you like, if you think about it in that way. There's an open space for discussion, an open space for a market, an open space for culture. And then social media is this overlay onto it. Social media isn't the cause of these things at all. The causes are whatever the causes are, different in every case. But it is an interesting new enabler in that condition. It's enabled what I've just shown you. And it's funny how each one is its own thing. So we don't really do piazzas in the UK. We have high streets, which probably says something about our very commercial nature. But that's where the riots happened, largely on the high street. And there it was using BlackBerry Messenger. Occupy was really associated with Twitter. Arab Spring was really Facebook. Beppe Grillo uses Movable Type, which is a blogging platform none of you probably care about. But each one has its own particular thing. But there's these patterns emerging here. Facebook is used to organize the event. Twitter is used for real-time communication in the event. YouTube is used for broadcasting the event. BlackBerry Messenger is used to circumvent police communications. They all have their own conditions. Absolutely need to understand this if we're to understand contemporary culture and contemporary cities, I'd argue. Meanwhile, in Helsinki, things are much calmer. Occupy Helsinki was a derisory attempt by 15 people with one placard. Things are fine in Helsinki. What was interesting to us was that this is a public artwork. You can tell it's public art because it's not very good. But it's the word Helsinki written as a scaped sculpture, designed to be skateboarded upon, commissioned by the city council in this cycle path. So the city council, the commune effectively in Helsinki, commissioned this. As soon as it was built, people started complaining about the noise who lived next door to it. People lived on either side of this sculpture, and the noise late at night of the skateboards drove them to complain to the city council. The city council then, after a couple of days of getting the complaints, then sent out these guys to dig a trench, a hole around the sculpture to stop skaters skating on the sculpture that they'd commissioned. So one side of the city council was commissioning the sculpture, the other side was vandalizing it very actively, responding to public opinion, or so it seemed. What this film actually is 3 days later, there were so many complaints about the hole, about the complaints, that the city council had to send out the diggers to fill the trench back in again. And that's what you see these poor guys doing now. They're putting the road back, having just dug the hole 3 days before. We happened to be here filming this because it was near where our office was, and it just seemed, this is almost psychotic behavior from an institution. I mean, if you saw a person digging a hole in the garden, planting some flowers, and then digging it up the next day, you'd think, this is a bit odd. What a strange, obsessive, compulsive thing to do. But this is where now city councils are caught, because it's so effective, it's so easy to complain using contemporary tools. How many complaints is enough? You know, there's no rule book for them. Is it 300 complaints and then we send the diggers out? Or is it 3,000? I don't know. Or is it 30? And then how many complaints do we need before we put the diggers back in to fill the hole? You know, I feel almost sorry for the city council. I mean, they clearly should have consulted the neighbours beforehand. Clearly terrible, terrible, terrible consultation. But the broader point about how an institution now just looks unbelievably slow and cumbersome and stupid, actually. We see this time and time and time again now. Also in Helsinki at the same time, however, there's this beautiful thing. This is a woman in her first floor apartment. She's lowering a basket to the street. You put €3 in the basket, €5 maybe. Helsinki's expensive. And you get, she makes a bacon and egg sandwich for you and puts it in the basket and lowers it down. So that's what she's doing. This, to explain, is a street food festival set up by citizens themselves directly because it was so difficult to start a street food enterprise in Helsinki. The regulations were so tough, only in Finnish, incredibly high environmental health standards, way higher than the EC needed them to be. And as a result, 3 guys got so annoyed by this, he said, let's tell you what, all of our friends, we go out of here now, on Saturday we're all going to start a street food thing in our apartments, in the parks. What's the worst that could happen? They're going to arrest us all? No, I don't think so. It's so nice. And we're distributed all over the city, it's not going to happen. And of course it didn't happen. Now this thing started with 40 on the first Saturday, about 2 years ago. Next one was 400. Now it's spread to 40 different countries worldwide. It's called Ravintolapäivä in Finnish, or Restaurant Day. Here's another example. An Argentinian woman who lives there is making empanadas, the great Argentinian street food, and lowering them to the street. That's my son in the foreground. This is a human empanada in the foreground. Dressing up to advertise that this is where you get the empanadas. Like, it's amazing. You know, what was interesting here was the city was diversifying rapidly, and actually the regulations had this very old idea about what Finnish street food wanted to be, if you like. All you could buy were these terrible hot dog sausages late at night for drunk people from metal boxes designed to be hosed down. It was just not good. But the regulations were designed to produce that condition. Meanwhile, Helsinki had diversified. This was the tension again, and then we get the evidence of citizens actually doing it for themselves now, because they can. They can organize for themselves en masse very effectively. And people will dress as an empanada all day about something they care about. I mean, how can the city react to that? They're useless against that kind of passion. This is a Thai soup kitchen in the park. To be clear, all of this is illegal. Completely illegal. None of these people have a license to sell food, to prepare food in public and to sell it. And yet you look at it, I mean, it's so effortlessly good. How could you arrest them? I mean, it's just impossible. It would be the worst public relations disaster you can imagine. These are French students making crepes. These are Finnish girls making cakes. I mean, you can't arrest that girl. But she's a criminal. But the regulation is so out of step. The behavior of the institution is so out of step with the street. This is a kiosk which I walked past every day that was closed every day. And every day I was thinking, somebody make me an espresso, please, one time. Someone open up an espresso joint, or a sushi bar or something. And we looked into this. Why is this always closed? It was only open on restaurant day. It's because there was a 2-year leasing requirement to take this out. You had to take a lease for 2 years as a potential entrepreneur. Now, if you have half an idea that you can maybe sell espresso there, but you really don't know, you can't promise a 2-year lease. This is a massive problem in Italy. The length of leasing for domestic accommodation, for commercial accommodation, is massively out of step with any kind of urban innovation. It needs to be something like 30 days. Then you could test whether espresso works there or not, and stop if it doesn't work, continue if it does work, and roll it forward. So simple. And there's many examples of this in the world that have unlocked creative city projects where previous attempts hadn't worked. When you're dealing with food, it's super interesting because you can use it as a proxy to unlock all of this stuff. Actually, our interest in this project was because it was about diversity. It was about how Helsinki was diversifying. Food is a great way to talk about that. It's better than talking about immigration, to be honest. It's a much easier way in. But you're also talking about carbon, logistics, public space, all kinds of stuff. So how could you use food to unlock public space and therefore unlock a more creative city to get at things like leasing structures using the existing city space? No new buildings required for this. This is in Schönberg in Berlin. In Berlin, the city council has no money to plant flowers on this street, so the citizens did it themselves. Each of the blocks takes care of the tree outside of their block, and they build these, I guess in English, planter boxes. I mean, it's a beautiful planter box. You know, people take real care of this stuff because, and also what's interesting is if the municipality had made this, it would be the same flowers or plants all the way down the street. Because every apartment block has different people in it, every planter box is different. There are different flowers outside. Sometimes edible things like herbs, sometimes other things. That's also illegal. No one has a license for it, but Berlin doesn't mind, right? You know, they just turn the other eye, turn a blind eye, as we say in English. So it's not strictly legal, that, or the previous one I showed you, but it is really good, right? You know, it's clearly a part of a good city. And we can say that it's a very small thing. It's kind of very hipster, if you like, street food and community gardens. They're such cliches in urban innovation. They're not the difficult things like a public hospital or a light rail system. But nonetheless, a city that took care of the small things would be probably a very good city. And often the council's remit has to be the big things, has to be the hospital in Prato. It can't possibly scale down to the individual planter box. The citizens can do that. So it's an interesting thing. Again, what's the scale of the decision? Who's involved at what scale? Open questions. More importantly, governments now have competition. Municipalities have competition. Those two things were purely organized by citizens directly and are probably, well, in the Helsinki case, Ravintila Päivä is one of the most interesting things that's happened there in the last 4 or 5 years. It's for the tourist side of the city of Helsinki, they desperately want to promote it, and they can't because it's still illegal. So there's a competition there. The most interesting urban innovation didn't come from government, it came from citizens using their own tools. This is how Ravintila Päivä was organized, using Facebook. Facebook is a brilliant tool for organizing. Cities don't have anything this good. You know, municipalities could never make anything as good as Facebook. It's impossible, unless they use Facebook, which is tricky for them sometimes. These are the mobile apps made by Restaurant Day. In 3 days, they made mobile apps across 4 main platforms. I can't even think what the 4th one is, probably Windows Phone, which 7 people use, but anyway. Made in 3 days in a kind of a hackathon. Again, like the woman dressed in the empanada, there's no way you can compete with that, actually. And when the city tries to, it's embarrassing. This is what the city of Helsinki tried to do when it tried to consult its citizens on the future of Helsinki, and it's one of the worst things I've seen on the internet in the last decade, I think. How will the Helsinki of your wishes come true? What is the future of motoring? I mean, no one asks what the future of motoring is since the 1950s. And it's not even mobility, you know, it's already thinking it's cars, you know, it's just so constrained. And then you have 60 characters to describe it. I mean, it's worse than Twitter. So this is an institution trying to do the right thing. Again, I almost feel sorry for them, but they have completely their own culture and tools. All of those tools exist. They're right there. Look, it's those two. This is it. Don't do that. Then they followed it up with this. They put a spreadsheet online for you to fill in. Like, I'm sure no one can read Finnish here, I guess, but even if you read Finnish, you wouldn't want to fill this in. But this is what an institution does, because it's got to deal with procurement. It has lengthy procurement time frames, 3 months, 6 months. So the problem is, the day after Restaurant Day, the kiosk was closed. I still wasn't getting my espresso. And that's where the institution is still incredibly important. So just to be very clear, I do not think the emergent crowd-led processes solve the city in any way. They come a massive way into a new, interesting conversation within the city. But the institution is incredibly important because they're the people actually that control whether this happens or not. In that leasing arrangement, that is open or closed, simple as that. And the city institution is the right place to put the leasing arrangement. It has a long-term perspective in a way that emergent crowd-led things do not. It can incorporate expertise in a smart way, in a way that emergent crowd-led processes is difficult to do that. And it's publicly accountable. It's democratically elected in the countries that we're lucky enough to live in a way that emergent crowd-led processes are not democratic, in the sense an institution is. So we need institutions. Equally, pop-ups pop down. Restaurant Day came and then went again very quickly. It's not a solution for lasting benefit to the city. Equally, it doesn't do the big stuff, as I said earlier, the big complex stuff. So something needs to sit in between Restaurant Day, municipality. In that big black hole in the middle, we need something pulling them together. Now, we were one of the people that stepped in there in Helsinki. It might be very different people in Prato, I don't know, but it's an interesting question. How do you pull these cultures closer to the municipality in the right way? We'd call this strategic design, and it actually came from an initiative started in the late 60s in Helsinki. This was set up by Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund, a sovereign wealth fund, whose job is to invest on the future of Finland. And they created an event with Paul Rudowski, with Buckminster Fuller, kind of the leading architects and designers of the time, put them on an island, Suomenlinna in Helsinki, and they addressed sustainability for the first time. 40 years later, we were working in the same space, unfortunately not quite the same caliber as Buckminster Fuller. But that's me and my three colleagues. My three colleagues were architects, you can tell because of their clothes. And I'm not an architect because I'm wearing a blue shirt and brown shoes. So that's the primary difference there. But, the way that we approached this thing about Restaurant Day is that we don't need to do Restaurant Day anymore because the citizens have done it themselves. We half thought that we might have to kickstart the street food revolution in Helsinki. That was our original starting point for a project, to make a food truck to open up this question. They did it themselves before we could even move. So we thought, okay, well, we don't do that. What's that space in the middle? We made something called Open Kitchen.
Start up their own food business. Maybe you know how to cook, but how about everything else that it needs to build up?
This is a leading restaurateur in Helsinki.
If you have an idea for a new restaurant concept, maybe Helsinki's best coffee shop or perfect street food stall, Open Kitchen is for you. In week 1, you learn from some of the best people in food industry how they got started from concept to operation. Week 2, you spend building and refining concept of your own. The program ends with you and your classmates operating a restaurant here at Kellohalli for a week. If this sounds exciting, we'd like you to apply. We're starting to accept applications 3rd of September at Open Kitchen.
I should point out that's what a Finnish person looks like when they're excited. But Anto is fantastic actually. Anto, he was very hungover when he was doing that. He used to be a rock star, and now he's an amazing chef in Helsinki. Helsinki, I know the Italians in the audience will not believe me. Helsinki has amazing food there now. It's been part of this new Nordic revolution. You know, the best restaurant in the world is in Copenhagen. Noma, Stockholm has incredible food now, so does Helsinki. So this was a massive innovation. And we created something that Anto was describing, which is basically a cooking school, but it didn't teach you how to cook because we could see from Restaurant Day that people knew how to make food. They could absolutely make fabulous food, crepes on the street, all kinds of things. But what we did was made a school to teach you how to get through the regulations, how to start up a cafe, because we knew that maybe 5% of the people doing Restaurant Day actually wanted to definitely set up a cafe. These were the applicants we got, which again shows the diversity of Helsinki in an interesting way. This is a Spanish woman.
Watching TV with their huge TVs and eating macaroni latico. I want to take them out.
My knowledge of food business is limited, and I hope you can help me making Helsinki a better place where eating is as much of a social event than a basic survival need.
So we made up this cooking school to help people get through the regulations, how to fill in the forms, how to sidestep the bureaucracy, how to start up a cafe, how to run a team, how to design the space. None of that stuff you get taught at cooking school. And nothing you'd get that through Ravintila Päivä. So it was that space in the middle. And with the municipality were on board as the sponsor. They gave us the space to do it. They were watching very closely, so we pulled them into it. Again, we were working in the space between Restaurant Day and the municipality. So interesting using, it's an interesting thought. How do you use food as a kind of media or medium or as a forum for a project? Because it's immensely interesting. Within that is this idea of dark matter. So dark matter in physics terms is most of the universe. No one's ever seen it. It must be there for all of the matter to exist. It's one of those physics concepts. Don't think about it too much. What's interesting in this bit in orange here, if you really want to change the city, it's in the institutions that you have to do your design work. Choosing a building to try and change the city is incredibly slow. It's just such a cumbersome tool. Why would you choose that tool? What if you used institutions? This was Wouter Vansterf, who is a Dutch architectural historian. If you address that layer, you get this kind of systemic change, which is what we were interested in, system change. When we did this project, which was a building, we were using a building to try to change the city. But we were doing it through saying, let's build as much of this as possible in timber, in wood. So using new wood technology, you can build the entire building in wood. You don't need any concrete or steel, actually, structurally. Immense breakthrough, and I firmly believe if we get this right, cities of the future will be largely built out of wood. It's a very interesting thought. It doesn't burn because it's so dense, it's super compressed. It's aesthetically pleasing, it's incredibly low carbon, if not carbon positive, whereas concrete and steel, incredibly high carbon. So we wanted to use wood. The other interesting thing about wood is that Finland is 90% wood. It's basically lakes and forests. So the forest industry, which was actually suffering somewhat because it was making toilet paper, largely, and basic paper products, was going out of business because the equatorial paper industry was moving much quicker. So this would give a new trajectory to the forestry business. And that's something, again, you don't get usually on a building project. How can we help out a different industry? That's not a thought that usually occurs to a property developer, I can tell you. So this is the advantage of the strategic design approach, where you step back from it and say, well, how do we use the building as a Trojan horse to actually help a completely different business in this case, as well as the building industry? So in that case, it turned out you couldn't build a wooden building in Helsinki because the building code had been written in the 19th century and said you shouldn't build a 9-story wooden building. Possibly it's the same in Prato right now. I'd be very interested to know if the building code says you can build a 9-story wooden building. I would guess it probably doesn't. So we lobbied the city to change the codes, and they changed the codes. So that was my colleagues probably doing the biggest single design act on the project. Changing the building code of the city enabled not just one wooden building, but multiple wooden buildings. Enabled potentially the city of the future to be wooden. Now there are 4 wooden buildings going up in the southern Finland region. If we hadn't changed the code, if we hadn't engaged with the dark matter, we'd have 1 wooden building. And the industry may or may not follow. And developers want that 1 wooden building. You have to have something outside of that which says, what code can we change, which enables a systemic change there? Again, like the leasing structure. How do you unlock the creative city? The interesting question there would be to say, can you see a law as a design challenge there? Let's look at the law and unlock that creatively. We need the world's most creative lawyer on this job. I don't know if one exists, although in Italy there probably is one. So we need lawyers working with architects, with designers, with sociologists, with all the people I mentioned before, because if you change a law, you get genuine systemic change. So this is designing from matter to dark matter, from the building to the law, backwards and forwards. And to be clear, we still need those strong institutions. But I'm afraid, what I've showed, I hope, through some of the images, that they need to be completely redesigned for the 21st century because we are in a different condition now. And citizens have actually better tools than the government That's a big question. What happens when the citizens have better tools? The way to lead the change is through projects. So I'll finish with one last project around working with people. So how do you work with people beyond consultation? Consultation is the worst thing you can do, it would seem to me. Collaboration is a much better place to start. Consultation is, how do you like my plan for the new light rail? How do you like my plan for the new hospital in Prato? That's consultation. That is not really much of a conversation. It's like, okay, it's all right. No, I don't like it. And usually it's no, I don't like it, because they haven't been part of the conversation. So what I find interesting is systems that rely on people in collaboration. This is a shared space network in the Netherlands. It's a particularly lovely day in Holland, as you can see. And what is interesting about this intersection is there are no signs and no traffic lights. There's only one sign, actually, but there are no traffic lights. This is the safest way to design an intersection. The guy that designed it is here. He's Hans Monderman, and a very interesting guy. He's dead now, but he led this idea of shared space. Shared space works because people take responsibility for their actions as part of a system. So you drive into that, you cycle into that, you walk into that, you're highly alert, you're looking everybody else in the eye, and you negotiate your way across. It's the same when I cycle through Treviso on a bike, actually, I have to say. It works, and that is the safest way to do it. You add traffic lights to that, people will start having accidents because they start outsourcing their decision-making to software, in that case, which is what a traffic light is. It's a robot, basically. So you're outsourcing your decision-making to robots. Humans become passive within the system. Accidents happen. So I'm very interested in this. It's not just you were working also in terms of individual self-interest, although that is part of it, but you're aware of a civic condition. That it's a shared condition, actually, with other people moving through it. This is another example from Chile, which I won't go into in detail, but it's basically when there was a major earthquake there in 2010, the city of Constitución was flattened. That was it. And they had to rebuild the city, and they did some immensely interesting work around collaboration. This idea of hybrid forums, which comes from Michel Calon, who's a colleague of Bruno Latour, looking at how experts get in the way of decision-making, often in collaboration. And these guys did an amazing project. And they redesigned the city. They replanned the city in 90 days through this intensely collaborative process, building a space for it in the demolished downtown out of wood, pulling the citizens there to it every single day, drawing them in through any means possible, social media and a loud hailer on the back of a car. And in 90 days, they remaster planned the city of, I think, 50,000 people. To give you an idea, in Helsinki, to master plan the space that our building was on took 11 years. 11 years for an empty space with no one in it. This took 90 days for a city of 50,000. Incredibly interesting. There's a lot online about this project, but these things are designed to be participative, to be collaborative from the ground up. They rely on active, engaged citizens, not passive citizens. So finally, this idea of Kickstarter urbanism. How do you take this kind of movement around crowdsourcing and crowdfunding and social media-led stuff into urbanism? Because it's happening. Kickstarter is a site designed to enable people to self-finance books or iPhone cases and things like this. People have begun to bend it to try and use it for urban projects. This is a pool in the East River of New York, and they raised $40,000 to get the feasibility study done. How do we understand the fact that wasn't designed for that? There wasn't a democratic process. It's not anything to do with city planning, and yet it's an urban project happening in New York now. Again, it's to be very clear about this. Social media is not democratic. It seems it's very accessible, but it's not the same thing. We have to be very aware of that. And yes, it's easy to crowdsource a revolution in a way, but not a light rail system. So there's a strange tension and dichotomy there, but that's, again, another thought for another day. But can you adopt the dynamics of that? So we did a project which said, okay, cities often look like this to citizens. This is from my brother-in-law in northern India. This is the complaint room at their local council. They don't make it easy to engage with. There's no suggestions box on the front of town hall. How do you have an idea for a place in a city is not an easy thing to do. Any of the disused spaces around Prato, do you actually know how to get into them, do a project there, open them up? I would guess not. Do you know who to talk to? What bylaws and permits are required? No. So traditionally, citizens have been in this cities have been in a recessive mode, often trying to say no to things. Not through any fault of their own, it's just an institutional condition. And we got at this by looking at wind turbines, actually. How come Germany and Denmark does wind turbines, but every other country in Europe screws it up one way or another? Germany and Denmark had done it through building citizens into the process. So this is the idea behind Kickstarter, which is a project we did in Helsinki again. The idea is that you take a picture of an empty space or a space that's got development potential. You upload it to here. The city also does the same. In fact, this is the city's system. So imagine this is run by the city council. I designed it very quickly in 4 days, so be gentle with me. But I designed it to not look like a municipal system, but it could be. There's no reason why it couldn't look like this, right? And it enables people to upload the project, describe it, and then attract consensus around it and try to get it done. So these are all actually empty spaces, more or less, in Helsinki. This one down the bottom, Tower of Power, it was an empty building in a park right in the middle of Helsinki. I had no idea it was empty. It was an amazing space, but it's been used for storage by the city council. And it clearly isn't the best use of that space, but how do you unlock that? No one would know. So the idea is, again, you find a space, you describe it, you probably use a video to describe it because that's the way you do things now. This is designed by the Finnish architect Alvar Aalto, actually, but it's the entrance to a car park, which isn't really used. So what could it be? It could be a flower shop, it could be a display case for 3D printers, it could be a co-working space, you know. And then you raise donations from the people in your neighborhood to get the feasibility work done. Projects often fall over at the first stage. When you go to the council and say, hey, you've got this great entrance to a car park, I'd like to make a co-working space in there. They just laugh at you because you haven't got the permits, you haven't got the engineer's report. They say, do you know what's involved in doing that? And of course, citizens don't. But if you could raise a bit of money to engage an architect or an engineer or a lawyer just to check it out, it makes your case far more convincing when you go to the city. Because then you can say, yeah, actually, we had the engineer check it, it seems fine. The architect said it needs something doing on the front. The lawyer says we can use it for this with just a change of purpose form and so on. What's interesting there, though, again, we did this as a design prompt, a research project. I'm not suggesting that we actually do this necessarily, but if you just use crowdfunding, it's not democratic. Someone could drop €1 million on that and stand a better chance of doing it. That's clearly not a democratic system because the capital is speaking too loudly within it. So this vote box here is also kind of interesting. What if you can vote for it? And what about how big is the decision making again? What if it was a wind turbine in the piazza in Prato? And I say, oh, we should put a wind turbine there. And I managed to get consensus for it. Now Shane in Melbourne could also say, well, I'd like to see more wind turbines in the world. I'll give you €50. Now, how do we work that out? Because actually the people in Prato should make the decision about whether there's a wind turbine in their piazza. But because of this internet, we can actually extend the decision-making in the capital globally. And in a way, you'd probably want to do that. You could get more money for projects in Prato. But how do you make that a democratic decision again? Does his money speak less than mine, or does his vote count less? All of these things are questions. This is using design to unlock the questions. You can also do some basic stuff like broker your time. There's a time brokering thing. If you're a lawyer that wants to work on this stuff, volunteer your time. This project needs these kinds of things. Very important that you build in public face-to-face meetings around this kind of stuff. You can't do this all online. It's totally different when you're talking to someone in a physical environment. These are people that back it. All of this stuff is made up. It's fictional, but it's so easy to do this. What happens if you throw social media at urban planning? This is what comes out. How does the councillor appear in this? It's an open question. How does the syndico appear here? What kind of, is it dialogic like this, like an actor in the system, or is it the official voice of the institution? From a permitting point of view, how do you reveal how things get done? So when a project happens usually in an urban space, it doesn't leave any traces behind for anybody to copy. And yet there's a story there. You have to get this permit, then this one, then this one. On this permit, question 4 is the really important one. You can kind of ignore all the rest. All of that tacit information that we built into the food project earlier, that can be shared online effortlessly. That's what the web does very, very, very well. So imagine projects that leave traces behind for other projects to follow, that are kind of an urban literacy, basically. So This isn't just a website. That was a website, but it's not just a website in a way, because it's kind of about what we decide the city is for. You imagine it, again, it's a suggestions box, but it's linked to the municipality. It's part of it, and it's part of that system. It's not trying to go around it like Restaurant Day went around the city. This is part of a new kind of institution in a completely different kind of behavioral mode effect. And it might be a way of unlocking conversations about what the city's for, who it's for, how we decide that. In effect, the social contract, the relationship between citizen and government. What does that look like now? Giancarlo De Carlo, one of my favorite Italian architects, said this long time ago. What I think he means by that, I have no idea. But what I take it to mean is that there are more people involved than just architects. Architects have an incredibly useful role to play in this condition, in this scenario, but only in concert with other people. He made this lovely series of films in the 50s that are worth looking at another time. So, again, at Fabrica, we arrange these multidisciplinary teams. I'd urge you to do the same if you're seriously thinking about Prato. It's not just all of these things, but it is all of those things and more. You can't approach it from the point of view of architecture, planning, or the economy. It's too reductive. It needs to be this genuinely 21st century approach. And that, I think, might be a new role for design, actually, within there somewhere. Not, as we said earlier, as Shane said, not in the design of objects, although they're also important. We still have to make buildings, but in the wider condition around it, the dark matter around the matter. That's an incredibly important role to play. So, institutions, the street. We have this new networked urbanism going on here. There are people dressing as empanadas. There are people using Facebook to self-organize waste collection. Seriously. There are very few things the municipality does now that people will not try to self-organize with new tools that are better than the ones the municipality has. That's a big deal. This Piazza social media combination is incredibly powerful, as the videos I showed you earlier mean. But we do need the institution, absolutely. We just need the institution to come to the party on the terms of the 21st century. That's so important that we still have long-term thinking, democratically elected, publicly accountable institutions. It's just a change in behavior, a change in communication. For me, ultimately, this is the point, that designing better cities means designing better decisions, ultimately. The way that we make decisions, that's the design challenge. Thank you very much. Thank you.